Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that the right book at the right time can change lives, and that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So, that's what we do here on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature: picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels for readers of all ages. In each episode, we'll talk with children's literature authors and discuss their books, their hopes, their dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. Whether you're an adult reading to their inner child or connecting the young readers in your life with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. So grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back to another bookish conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I'm talking with Sean David Hutchinson. Sean is the author of multiple young adult novels. Some of those titles include We Are the Ants, The Past and Other Things That Should Stay Buried, and the memoir Brave Face. He's here today to talk about his newest book for middle grade readers, A Home for Unusual Monsters. It's a companion novel to his middle grade debut, The School for Invisible Boys. And in this new book, 12-year-old Sam and her friends search for clues that lead to the secret hiding places of strange and unusual monsters. It's captivating, it's immersive, and I can't wait to talk to Sean about it. So let's get right to the episode. Sean, welcome to KidLit Love. I'm so glad you're here today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
We may have been chatting for a minute or two before we hit record. So I am quite certain that we are going to have lots of fun to talk about and listeners to listen in on. And I would love to start with a good old-fashioned introduction. Could you give listeners and future readers a little bit about you, your background, your journey through KidLit, and how you arrived here talking about middle grade books?
Sure. So yeah, I am Sean and Sean David Hutchinson, and I was born in South Florida. And my writing journey actually began when I was really young. I would watch movies or read books, and then I would take to my notebooks and I would write, uh, what I wanted to see happen. So I would write, my little unofficial sequels. I was doing fan fiction in notebooks before, I even had the internet. um, and so yeah, I always wanted to be a writer. It was just one of those things that, I read books and I followed authors, but it was one of those things where I was like, I didn't realize it was something that I could do as like, a career. So I went to school, I studied medieval literature and medieval and Renaissance literature in college. And, I always worked with computers. I love taking things apart. I famously almost electrocuted myself trying to take the washing machine apart when I was young. And my mom was trying to teach me how to tell time. Uh, I took apart every single watch that she bought me because I needed to know like how it worked, how it, what was making it work. And finally, she ended up buying me a watch that they make for kids that had a see-through face so that I could see the mechanical parts working. Yeah, it was really
Smart
smart.
mom.
Oh, she was great. And she was great because she encouraged that, so like she encouraged, my sort of mechanical, leanings by buying me, I don't know if they even make them anymore. They were called like constructs, it was like you build little things,
Yes.
there were some with mechanical motors inside. So you could build little, articulating arms, but she also made sure that like I always had books. So, like we didn't really have a lot of money because my mom was disabled when I was 7. She fell down a flight of steps and just ruined her back. And so, money was always tight. But like, A, I never really knew it until I was older. And B, like, there was always money for books. Like, she never ever made me feel like, wanting a book was a bad thing. And so I always had those. And so, anyway, so yeah, so I had always wanted to write. I love to read. I had been, I never stopped doing it. Even as I went through high school and college, I just never really took it seriously. And then I was approaching 30, and I keep saying that I'm a writer, but I haven't finished anything. So I think I need to do that. I need to like either do it or just admit that like it's just something like it's a hobby, which is fine, like
Right.
writing as a hobby is a great hobby, right? Not everything has to be something that like
Right.
we make money off of.
Mhm.
And so, I sat down and I wrote a book and it was really, really bad. Oh, it was so bad. It was kind of an homage to Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. Um, and, but it was terrible. Like calling it an homage is really insulting to the book because it was just that bad. And then I wrote another book, and it was also really, really terrible, but it was also insanely long. I mean, it was, I think, like 175,000 words, and I hand wrote the entire thing.
Wow.
And I swore never to do that again. And it was also famous. It was just so bad. And then I had this idea as my mom ended up in the hospital, and she was living in Tennessee at the time. I was still in Florida, and I didn't really know what was going to happen to her. She was having some heart problems, and I remember I went to bed and I was like, I don't know if I should go up there. She's telling me not to spend the money, but people really should get a warning 24 hours before they're going to die so that they can let their loved ones know and everyone, can do it. And I woke up the next morning still thinking about it. And that idea became my first book, The Death Day Letter, which the first draft of which was also really terrible. And I got very, very lucky that when I sent it out, my agent that I ended up signing with, he saw the potential and was very patient in helping me craft it into something better. And then again, when we sold it to my first editor at Simon Pulse, she was also like, I love this. I love the voice, blah, blah, blah. But you're also going to rewrite, like 70% of this from scratch. Like 70% of this is just going right in the garbage.
Wow.
So yeah, and that book was not particularly well received, as it shouldn't have been. It was still not very good, but it was also I was writing what I thought the market wanted at the time. I hadn't authentically, decided to write as myself, where I write a lot of queer characters who are open about their journey. At that point in time, the market was not as welcoming, and so I think that really held me back, um, just my own fears. And surprisingly, my editor was very open minded to everything. And I think if I had been more open, she would have just totally rolled with it. But yeah, so then I started that. That was 2010. The first book came out. 15 years later, I'm still going. I've written, I think, like 13 or 14 or 15 YA novels, including nonfiction, um, YA memoir about my struggles with depression and coming out. Um, I've had a really interesting career. We Are the Ants is the book I'm most known for. Um, it's sold in multiple countries. Yeah, it's done so much better than any of my other books. People really connected to it in a weird way. I actually wrote it as the book that was going to end my career because I was like, nobody's going to want to buy this. Because when I wrote it out, like I wrote all the things out. Like I wrote like here are some plot lines, and then off to the side of my whiteboard, I wrote aliens question mark. And I was just like, nobody's going to want to read this. And people really did. They really connected to it. And so I had always sort of wanted to, as I was writing YA, it's my lane, it's my comfort zone. But I had always wanted to write middle grade too, because I loved middle grade books growing up. Like Susan Cooper's The Darkest Rising sequence was just like it was like everything. And one of the most foundational books, I think, for me was A Wrinkle in Time. And for me, like that was the first time. It was the first time that I, connected to a character, uh, you know, who felt like me, where they weren't like, yeah, they were the hero, but also like they were a little bit awkward and a little bit weird, and then A Wrinkle in Time also sort of mixes that realistic drama with sort of like absurd fantasy science fiction in a way that I think imprinted on me because it's what I really enjoy doing as well. And so middle grade has always had a really special place for me, and so I wanted to write a middle grade. I had this idea even before I think I published my first book. It was I had always known it was called The School for Invisible Boys, And it was just about this boy who was invisible. And and that was really all I know. And over the years, I had sort of just kept working on it, and kept shifting the ideas. And finally, I reached out to my editor, Lisa Abrams, and I had worked with her for years and years at Simon and Schuster, and then she left to found her own imprint, Labyrinth Road. And I sent her the idea, and and she and I have always had that kind of relationship. Where like one day I remember I was visiting New York and I was in her office, and that's how I asked her about the nonfiction. I was like, "Do you write nonfiction?" And she's like, "Why? Do you want to write a memoir?" And I was like, "I don't know, do I?" And she's like, "I think you
I
should."
think you
And
do.
so yeah, so we had like this really great relationship, and so I pitched the School for Invisible Boys to her, and she really loved the idea and the concept, and she's like, "But it's not quite there." She's like, "Your execution and everything, like it's not quite there." And I had originally intended it to be in like this this like boarding school, like almost like a military school type situation. And she was just like, she helped me sort of hone it and bring the idea back to something more personal, which is, it ended up being set at a Catholic school, and it's at an all boys Catholic school. I didn't go to an all boys Catholic school for middle school, but I did go to Catholic school. And so she really helped me bring it in. And from there, like when I wrote that again, I had written it intending it to be a standalone. And we got to the end, and she's like, "Do you want to make this a sequel? Like, do you want to make this a series?" And I was like, "I kind of do." And so I guess that, yeah, that brings us to A Home for Unusual Monsters, which, so A Home for Unusual Monsters is really interesting. It's follows a character from the School for Invisible Boys, and her name is Sam Osborne. And she has the ability to change the way other people perceive her. So like if she wants, like, so she infiltrates in the first book. She infiltrates the all boys Catholic school, and she does it by just dressing in the uniform and showing up, and people expect to see a boys at an all boys Catholic school, and so that's how they see her, and that's her special power. And she works for an organization called Kairos, whose mission is to investigate things that are strange and unusual, including monsters. And so in A Home for Unusual Monsters, Sam is sent on a mission to infiltrate the Griffin family. And the Griffin family, their grandfather is a recently deceased Kairos agent named Lionel Frobisher. And the organization thinks that he had a list that he was compiling of monsters who are living among us, but are posing as humans. So Kairos sends Sam in to get that list. And of course, like, she's not the only person looking for the list. And the longer she stays at the Griffins, the more she learns that like things aren't exactly what they seem. Um, and so this one also has like a really interesting sort of evolution. Is one of my best friends, her son is named Graham, and and so that's who I named, one of the Griffin characters after. And I had actually, like, when he was younger, I had wanted to write a story for him, and um, and so I had come up with this idea for this book called "The Day Monsters Moved In Next Door," about this boy named Graham who gets a pair of glasses that allows him to like see that things are different. And um and I, I never could make that story work until I started thinking about the sequel, and I started thinking about Sam, and I went back to that story, the day monsters moved in next door, and I just sort of adopted the pieces of that I really enjoyed, and that's how Sam's story came to be. And I sort of, I don't know if you remember, there's a really old movie. There's a movie called The Burbs with Tom Hanks, and it's they move into,
Yes, yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's not a great movie at all. Like, but it's one of those movies that I saw as a kid, and so it just sort of like, like just moved into my mind for the rest of my life. And I just sort of remember that, like, living next door to somebody, to like these weird people. And so yeah, so that's how Sam's story really came about. And but I kind of had like intentions with each book. So like, the School for Invisible Boys is really about, bullying and toxic masculinity. the way that we perceive each other. And when I started doing Home for Unusual Monsters, it's like, what is this story really about? And again, it goes back to perception and how we see each other, and um, the sort of assumptions that we can make when we first see somebody. And I think again, like I always go back to sort of like references, but like there's that really funny beginning scene in Men in Black where Will Smith is going through the training, and he's being taught to shoot at the monsters, and he ends up shooting at little Susie with her physics books, because what
Yes.
is she doing in this
Yes.
bad neighborhood with the physics book? And like that again, yeah, that's like an imprinting, like where I think like we make these assumptions based on the way people look, and the things that we think are scary, but maybe they're not actually as scary as they seem. And so yeah, that's really what that story is all about. Really, I guess what the whole series is all about.
Yeah, you know why I think I love it so much is as a former educator, as a mom of three, now old kids. I mean, they're 18 and 20, so we don't read kids' books together anymore. What I loved about the book, there are a lot of things, but I think one of the big kind of overall things was that this was a story that in the introduction I called captivating and immersive, right? Kids are going to be in it. Like, who is the monster? And what do you mean she can, change the way she looks? And how is she a kid who's doing this investigative work? And what do you mean about this? Like, that is a all in, let me find out what's happening kind of thing. And as a result of that, you have those deeper themes, which I feel like is the magic of middle grade, that these stories have
Yes.
these like little gift boxed lessons that are just so natural for readers to consider because they
Yes.
were so invested in the story. And so being in it because of that captivating nature of it just lends so naturally to asking those questions that Sam is starting to ask, that the story around her,
Yes.
I don't like to give spoilers, but not everybody is who everybody thought everybody was, right? That's what we can see
Exactly.
in the stories that have been passed along, or the ideas that we think we have may or may not be true. And it was such a natural progression for readers, middle grade readers, this adult reader, get those insights at a deeper level. Like when that can happen, the kids are in it and then they walk away like, oh, it
Yeah.
was a magical thing that I think started to happen way, but really mid to end. And you just start to realize that this is a book that is so much more than a home for unusual monsters.
And I think you're right. Like that is, and it's honestly, it's one of the things that I love about middle grade. And you can do that to a degree in YA. But YA is for teenagers, and so teenagers are a little bit more cynical, and not cynical in a bad way, but they're learning how to sort of really question everything. And whereas middle grade readers are still sort of in that, they're looking inward a little bit, but they're still really outward facing. And so you have that ability to sort of, I don't know, reach out to them with these big questions, and just like tap them on the shoulder and be like, but have you considered this? And like my editor Lisa, when we did the School for Invisible Boys, like I said, it's about bullying a lot, and sort of like the beginning thing is that my main character Hector is bullied by one of his best friends, and they have this falling out. And my editor Lisa, like we started talking about how it featured toxic masculinity, and we got this really great scene in it where Hector realizes that yes, he has been bullied, but to other people, he has also been seen as a bully himself. And he has done things that other people have felt bullied by him, that he had no idea, he hadn't even considered. And I think that that's the sort of thing you get to do in middle grade, is you get to flip those things around and show people, or show these kids, like just think a little bit more, and really consider some of these questions. And with a Home for Unusual Monsters, yeah, I really wanted to focus on how we see each other and how we see ourselves.
I think what you just said drives home my whole point and my whole intention for this podcast as well, which is children's literature is not just for children, right? There are lots of
Um,
grade readers who will be lucky enough to get that message that you just said of going inward and really thinking. And there are a lot of adults that I can think of that need that same message. So it's exactly
yes.
why these books can be just as powerful for adults who might need to remember a
Oh
message,
yeah.
who might need to remember everything what is that? Everything I need to learn, I learned in kindergarten. Something like along the lines of that book, that it can be hard to see what we don't see. A book
Yes.
can help us see it, but I think for an adult, a book that may talk to that inner child is
Oh,
just so
for
powerful.
sure.
Yeah.
And I actually, one of the really interesting things, my brother and I talk about this a lot. He's about 5 years older than me. Is I talk about how I don't feel older because I'm still listening to music that's coming out now, and I feel like, I mean, obviously, like, there are certain things when I hear some slang and I'm just like, no, like, we're not doing that, but I'm really open to modern music and modern movies, and I haven't just sort of like fossilized into what I liked when I was 20. And I firmly believe that Kidlit has had a lot to do with that for me, because it has kept me questioning. It has kept me sort of thinking, and not crystallizing my views and going, okay, this is how it is. I'm old man yelling at clouds, and I really appreciate that about Kidlit, is pushing assumptions, and honestly, like, even coming from the queer community as I have, I'm not sure I would have been as open minded about transgender issues without the Kidlit community pushing me forward and questioning my views. Because when I was younger, I didn't know any transgender people. And so it was, my views were not, uh, they weren't progressive. They really weren't, because I didn't understand, and being in Kidlit and knowing people, and meeting transgender people and talking to them has just allowed me to sort of keep pushing my views forward and keep questioning. And I think that that has expanded to every aspect of life. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I always tell people I appreciate my adult readers, but I write for kids.
Yeah.
But I really do appreciate my adult readers, and I think that there is so much to be gained from adults reading, reading kids literature. And it is also, like, with the way book bans have been going, my position has always been, I do appreciate that parents have the right to decide what their kids read, but I would also encourage parents to read what your kids are reading.
Yes.
Please don't just tell your kid they can't read something because it's got something in there that you've heard is bad. Please read it for yourself,
Yes.
and I think that is so incredibly important. And I think maybe sometimes the parents would get more out of reading it than their kids would.
I completely agree. I feel like, in especially with how the world is today, like the overlooked tool that everybody else is overlooking, not us, not in this community, but people, books. You just need to read books. You need to put yourself in
Yes.
the other shoe, into the shoes of someone else, go to a different time, place, location, gender, religion, whatever it is, because
Yes.
there's so much research. This is where I get really nerdy. There's so much research into the brain, into the mirror neurons, that things fire in our brains when we read books that could
Oh
never
yeah.
fire in our brain without it, because we're not in that experience. But when it does, it literally changes our brain. It changes the way we think. It changes how empathetic we are. It just
Oh
changes
yeah.
everything. It changes
No, it
everything.
really does.
Yeah.
It really does, and in ways that I don't even think we understand fully. Where it, I one of the things, especially so being a queer author who writes books, especially for queer youth, I get a lot of questions. They're like, these books are going to turn our kids gay. I'm like, here's the thing: is books don't turn your kids gay. What books do is give your children the tools that they need to understand who they are.
Yes.
And you know reading those books isn't going to turn your parents gay either, but it might give them the tools to understand who their children are.
Mhm.
And you know that's the thing, is you can withhold these books from kids, but they're still going to be gay if they are. They're still going to be these people. What you're doing is you're denying them these tools to help them understand themselves, and you're going to make their lives a lot harder, which was one of the reasons I wrote my memoir, because I didn't have those tools. You
Right.
know, like I came from a very open-minded family. Well, I came from half of a very open-minded family. And I lived with the open-minded half, you know. When I came out to my mom, she had a little cry, you know, and it was only because my older brother is also gay, and so she was I was the last hope for biological children for her, which is not the end all be all, and she understands that. But you know, it was a little thing for her. But I mean, you know, I was never, you know, I wasn't put, there was never even a threat that I was going to be put out of the house or anything like that. But I was still depressed and very suicidal because all of the media that I had access to painted, you know, being gay as something that would end up with me being, you know, getting HIV/AIDS, you know, being a prostitute, ending up on drugs. I mean, it was all dire and terrible, or it was the butt of a joke. And so there wasn't a lot of positive messages out there, and so sort of, you know, my aim is to ensure, not just with my book but with everybody's books, like you know, uh, I want kids to be able to read and understand themselves and feel a little bit less, you know, lonely than I did. And I'm real happy about how far we've come, and I'm real sad about how far back we're going, because you know the book bans have really hurt queer authors a lot.
Yeah, I want to touch upon what you just said about lonely, right? Because books do offer us individually, you know, reading is often a solitary, independent, sometimes
Yes.
experience. Yet, when you reach out to a fellow reader, when you connect with an author, you feel less alone. But even just the act of reading it can make you feel less alone. Like
Yes.
fictional characters, they are real to me, right? Especially
Oh
memoirs.
yeah.
They are real to you. But one thing your book has done for me, and I'm smiling and laughing because I have had some of the best conversations that I have had with the people around me because of the opening chapters of your book. So I want to give a little premise here for listeners because we didn't mention it yet, but the book opens, you know, Sam is this really cool undercover agent and observing some things that are going on. And the so-called case, I guess, if you will, that initially started everything was this. I don't even know if I'm going to explain it right because it's just so cool. But basically, you know, the big question is, and I'll let listeners figure out how that arrives with the cool houses and all the stuff in it. But would you trade 10 years of your life in order, you know, to have this big old calm, peaceful revelation of what your purpose is and leave beautifully? And that question has haunted me in a really wonderful way since then. I don't know if you've ever read The Measure by Nikki Ehrlich.
No, no,
Okay.
I haven't. Now I should, I feel
You
like.
need to. So The Measure, it's an adult book where all of a sudden one day everyone in the entire world gets left this little box on their doorstep when they wake up in the morning. And when they open the door and they open the box, if they open the box, there is a piece of string in it. And the length of that string determines how long you will live. And so the big question in
Oh.
the book is, do you open it or not? Do you know or not? There's so many questions of what would you trade for that kind of knowledge. So I was reading this going, oh my gosh, I'm going to obsess with this question, just like I did. And I have been asking everybody, would you trade 10 years of your life to know your life's purpose? Would you trade? So the book has brought so much joy, so many conversations. I mean, having a conversation with 18 and 20-year-olds can be up and down. And this has sparked a lot. So I wanted to mention that piece because the connection that's coming as a result of the book, just talking about it,
Mm.
that is the best dinner time conversation I can recommend to someone right now.
You know, it's so funny because that, you know, that whole idea, it's one of the things that I don't want to say like I obsess over, but I have been very lucky in that I've always known what I wanted to do. Like I've always had I've always felt like I had a purpose, and my purpose was writing. Even when I didn't realize writing was like something you could do as a job, it was just I had this thing in me that I knew I had to do.
Yeah.
And I was going to do it whether people were paying me or reading my books or whatever. And I was in a relationship for a while with someone who didn't have that. And I didn't realize this was something that like other people struggled with,
Yeah.
where I would just add, I'd be like, what is the thing that drives you? And you'd be like, I don't know. Like, okay, what is the thing that like you have to do that like you can't like you can't get out of your mind? I don't know. Like, how do you not know? Like, do people really not know this, right? And I came to understand through that a lot of people really do sort of struggle with finding their purpose, finding what drives them. And so that was, putting that in the book, like that was a really interesting thing for me because I think, especially because once the purpose, and I don't think this is a spoiler because it really just happened in like the first chapter. It's like once they receive that gift, like they forget about it. And so they don't know, like they don't walk out going, now I know what my purpose is, but the seed of it is planted within them and it then grows.
Yes.
And I think like, I mean, because if somebody came along and said, by the way, your purpose is writing, I would be like, really? Because I'm also a contrarian. So I would probably be like, I don't think so. I'm not doing that because you told me to do it. But it's just this feeling in me and knowing that. I think there's something so comforting about knowing what your purpose in life is. And, of course, like I talked to my mom about this. My mom and I talk about a lot of these things. And of course, she said, she struggled with that until she had kids. And then she said, my purpose is you. Like, you are my purpose, and she had always wanted to write and she never really sort of like got into that groove where she was able to do it, because of life circumstances. And so she's like, she was like, I get to do that through you now, and so raising you and your brother, like that was my purpose. And I but I also like I look at a lot of people like they don't know like what their purpose is, and that makes me sad. It makes me sad for them, not because, I mean, yes, because they're lacking that, but because we live in sort of a world that doesn't encourage people to really search for that and find that. Like everything has to be monetized, everything has to be put online. And like I used the pandemic to learn how to play the piano and how to bake. And then I picked up the guitar. And the first question when I tell people about the hobbies is they're like, oh, you should open a bakery shop. Or, oh, are you going to start doing videos online? And I'm like, no, no one is ever going to see me play the piano. Like, that's for me. I do that for me. It happens quietly in my own apartment,
Yep.
you know, and it brings me so much joy. And it's a really interesting thing, but I love interesting sort of like philosophical questions like that. They drive a lot of my writing. Like, We Are the Ants is I mean, the whole central thesis is about a boy who is abducted by aliens and told that the world is going to end in 144 days and he can stop it. And all he has to do to stop it is press a button. And he's not sure he wants to because the world just feels so awful to him. And I loved it's the book that I toured for the most and I got to talk to people about the most. And I loved talking to kids about it. I loved it, because they're so thoughtful and it really they thought about it in deep ways that not even I did. And I wrote it. Like they came at it from angles that I just thought were beautiful and heartbreaking and brilliant. And I want every book to sort of do that.
Yeah.
Like there was a one scene in A Home for Unusual Monsters that I really wanted to put in. And it's not a spoiler, but it's a scene where they're at the lake and Sam is in a two-piece bathing suit for the first time. And just sort of questioning the way people are looking at her. And I'm not a girl, I've never felt uncomfortable being, male, but I have felt uncomfortable in my own body. And especially being in the gay community, like I have felt uncomfortable being me and looking the way I look and dealing with body dysmorphia, because I was really, really skinny when I was a kid and everyone told me I was anorexic when I wasn't. And then as I got older, I just, fluctuated, but you have that sort of image in your brain of what you look like and it's hard to escape. And it was just one of those things that I really wanted to keep in there because I wanted people to sort of think about not just how we see ourselves, but how we imagine other people see us and how that can affect us. and even Sam, who in that scene doesn't look like herself, is still dealing with that kind of body image. Like
Yeah.
she is in somebody else, like she appears to other people as somebody else, and she is still dealing with that. And I think, those sorts of body image issues run so deep.
Mhm.
Um, and they're just the sort of things that I really like to just like, tweak in there. And again, I was very lucky. So my editor Lisa and her assistant, who is an associate editor, they were both just so amazing at helping me craft a lot of those things, um, and just make sure that the book is accessible and not didactic. Where because I have a tendency, I can just really just go into something hardcore, and a lot of times uh, you just have to like just touch the surface and trust the reader to do some of the deeper thinking on their own. And they were both incredibly helpful at helping me pull back and not beat the readers over the head. Um,
You didn't beat the readers over the. You know who I wish I could be though? If I could jump into the book, who I wanted to be, I wanted to be Abby because I wanted to smell words.
yes, so it's so funny when you write a book. When you write a book, I especially like I put things in there that I think are hilarious, and when I get my first round of edits back, I'm always peeking at those jokes to see if my editors are laughing at those, and they never laugh at the jokes that I think they're gonna laugh at.
Of course.
And that was so that scene with Abby, who is a character who we only meet briefly, but she is also a Kairos agent, a child who has a special gift, and her gift is that she smells words, right? And she has this thing where they're having this conversation, and she just calmly says, "That's the saddest thing I've ever smelled."
Yes.
And I just thought that was so funny and heartbreaking, but also funny. And I got no reaction. I even asked my editor, and they're just like, "Yeah, no, that's fine." And I'm just like, "No, I
Oh, no,
love
I
that." But
got it. I got it. There's a sticky note. There's a sticky note on that part. So I'm with you. I'm with you on that one.
yeah, it's I sort of I love all of those things. I love being able to like I and I hope, and my hope is that I'll be able to continue with more books that explore these kids and their different gifts, because and of course, and I don't have my book on me because I'm in the process of moving, so everything is in boxes. But in that same scene we also meet another Kairos kid who has the ability to command people to do things.
Yeah.
And so anything he suggests, people will just do. And it forces him to be very, very conscious of what he's saying and thoughtful about how he says things. And it was just sort of a throwaway character. But to me, he is a character that I really wanted to put in there and sort of show about how we also have to be thoughtful of how we frame things and how we say things, because one of my sort of personal things that I work on is how I say things, because um, you know the way we say things is not how they're always interpreted by other people, and so you have to just be thoughtful about the way in which you say them. And so having that character who literally like it's life and death, so like how he says things. I mean, you could you may just randomly be like, ugh, whatever, why don't you just like jump off a cliff or something, like you think you're being sarcastic, but for him, I
Yes.
mean, that could be tragic. And so just getting to do stuff like that, I love this book. I love being able to do that. But I will tell you, okay, so I will tell you my favorite part of the book.
Oh, okay.
And so my favorite thing ever, and this is another one where my editors were like, yeah, no, that's cute, is coming up with the monsters. And there's little interstitial pages with a monster manual where Sam is sort of recording, or finding pages with the monsters. And I had so much fun writing those. But my favorite one was, I will never pronounce it, even though I made up the word. Pronounce it correctly, even though I made up the word. Was a little creature called a canalbuleza. Um, and
I didn't realize
it
you'd
is
say
yes, I have no idea. Like the audiobook people, they're like, "How do you say that?" And I was like, I mean, I don't know. I made, and they're like, "But you made it up." And I was like, "Yeah, I still don't know how I say it." Like I'm terrible at pronouncing words. And I think that as a book reader, you probably understand that where many times the only time I've ever seen a word is in print, so I have no idea how it's actually supposed to be spoken. Um, but with that one, it's this little imp creature that, as a fear response, it turns people into regional pastries
Yes.
and then leaves them in pastry shop windows to be eaten. And I remember, like, I was reading that bit to kids, and they were like, "Oh my god, that's so mean." And I was like, "Oh well, no, they don't understand that what they're doing. They think that the other humans come along and turn them back into humans. They don't get that they're being eaten."
Right.
I
Yeah.
just I love that. I don't know. That was my favorite part because
I loved
it was yeah.
Crimble. I loved Crimble.
Yes.
That was
Yeah.
that was a really cool one to learn about too. I'm so glad you mentioned those because I so enjoyed those little
Yeah.
insertions in between some of those chapters. I can see now
Those were
why
fun to
you
write.
like to undo your or what's the word I want? Not undo your watches, to like analyze and go into all those parts
Oh
because
yeah.
literally you kind of have to build this world, these words,
Yes.
these things as you go. And now I can see
Yeah.
where it all comes together. And that clear watch is kind of like your books. You're you're
Oh
helping
yeah.
all of us to
Oh
see
yeah.
this cool stuff.
It's one of the funny things about is it sort of did it bleeds over into everything. When I got older, my father used to bring home old computers from the company he worked at for me to take apart. Um, and I loved doing that. And from that, I learned how to build computers. And so, when I would play video games when I was a kid on the computer, I'm terrible at video games, but what I was really good at was taking the save files and figuring out how they all worked and then cheating, so that I could cheat through the games. And so I've always been sort of good at reverse engineering and doing that and building those. But it does it sort of it bleeds into every aspect of life, and it's the same with stories. And one of the things that I've always done is I am watching shows and predicting where they're going to go. And it was such a terrible thing. I had an ex, and we used to watch TV, and I would constantly blurt out what I thought was going to happen. And so one day, after I did that, he got up and he got me a piece of paper and an envelope, and he said, "Next time you think something, write it down, put it in the envelope, and then you can show me you were right later on." And I would do it, and it was so terrible
I
because
love
it would happen, and I would just shove the envelope at him, and I'd be like, "All right, look, look," and he would be like, "Yes, you're so smart, good job."
that.
But I think all writers are sort of like that. Even though I think it was George R. R. Martin who coined the phrase like gardeners and architects. Where some people they sprinkle seeds on the ground and see how they grow, and some people are meticulously building the blueprints. And I am very famously a gardener. Um, because my first drafts are just they're just chaos. I just sort of like throw everything out there and see what comes of it. But at the same time, once it's done, then I go back and essentially pick the entire thing apart and then rebuild it from scratch. And that's one of the things that I do is after I write the first draft is I used to throw them away, but now I am disciplined enough where I don't have to do that. So I will take a first draft and then I will outline it and write my notes and what I liked and what I didn't like and what worked and what didn't work. And then I would throw it away and I would rewrite the entire thing from scratch. And I don't have to throw it away anymore because I'm disciplined enough to just not look at it. Because I would just get too attached to something I had written, even if it wasn't working.
Mhm.
Um, but like that process of deconstructing the story after it's been written is actually it's my favorite part of writing.
Yep, I can see that.
Everybody else hates revision. I love it. It's my
Yeah,
favorite thing.
yeah. It's the equivalent of those old watches. Yeah.
Yes. And for me, that's where the real writing happens, right? Because when I'm writing a first draft, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea why things are a certain way. And sometimes things just, they rise up. One of my favorite stories was my second agent, for my third book, we were trying to come up with a title. And the title we ended up coming up with was The Five Stages of Andrew Brawley. And it's this boy who lives in a hospital, that his parents died after a car accident. And it's a book, it's all about grief. And I was calling it at the time, I was calling it The Walls, which is the most boring title. And so we were coming up with a thing, and she came up with the 5 stages of Andrew Bradley. And I was like, well, why? And she's like, oh, because he goes through the 5 stages of grief in reverse. And I was like, he does? And she was like, you didn't do that on purpose? And I was like, no. And so yeah, that's one of those things. And I think a lot of times that also happens in books is readers find things that maybe subconsciously you put in, or that just sort of worked their way in naturally, that you hadn't intended. Which, as someone who studied literature, like we always want to attribute so much of that to like authorial intent, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes the authors are just you know
Yeah,
things happened, and it's just a happy coincidence.
magic between the author and the reader is
Yes.
where that comes.
It's a conversation. like
It is.
like books are a conversation, right? Because like I write books and I filter I filter my stories through my experiences, which is why like two people can have the exact same idea and produce wildly different books. But readers are the same thing, because you are reading through like the lenses of your experiences.
Yes.
And so you're going to come at my story from wildly different ways. And I think, like, to me, like, that is sort of the beauty of stories, is not just how. And I've gotten these emails from kids where, like I said, like they read something and they come at me with an interpretation that I am just like, whoa,
Yeah.
like that is mind blowing. Like that was not even on my radar as a way that you could interpret this. And I love that. Like, absolutely adore it.
They get what they need, whatever that is, throughout the experience.
Yes. Oh yeah. And that's sort of another it's sort of another argument for me against book banning, is people talking about oh, kids aren't ready for some of these things. It's like, I was reading way above my age range when I was a kid.
Me too.
And I right, I mean, like, I think a lot of us end up doing that. Maybe not so much now, because I think there are more books for different age ranges than there
Yes.
were when we were kids. But the one thing that, upon rereading a lot of books, that I appreciated was how many levels there were, and how many things there were that just went right over my head, because I didn't need them, I didn't understand them, and I didn't care. It was just, if I saw something, that something about, oh, here's a good example. So there's a series of fantasy books called The Wheel of Time that I read when I was in middle school. I started reading and went into my 20s, and they made it into a TV show on Amazon. And I decided I was going to go back and try and read it. And one of the things that I thought, I was just like, I was like, oh, I had no queer books growing up. And I went back and I reread it, and I was like, oh my gosh. So in the Wheel of Time, there's a magic system, and it's matriarchal. Like, women are the only ones who use magic, and it's all, they live together. And it was like, there are so many lesbians in this book. It's all over the place. And my middle grade, it just went
That's right.
right over. High school, middle grade went right over my head. I didn't see it. And I was like, wow, he was a lot more. I mean, he was regressive in a lot of ways, but he was progressive in some ways that I never even found. I think, kids reading that, yeah, things go over their head. If they don't need it, like, they just, file it away, or, just pass it on, or, oh no, God forbid, like, they ask their parents, what is this? What does this mean? And, and then people have to have uncomfortable conversations. That was another thing I was lucky with. My mom never made me feel bad for asking questions, so even if it made her really uncomfortable,
Mhm.
she was
Had those
really good
moments
about
of,
that.
yeah, like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad, but oh my gosh, what do I say? Yes.
But yeah, books are just amazing that way.
They are. They are. And I want to ask you about more that you will write. So this is
Ah,
time for us to give us any
yes.
peeks, insider information. What might be coming next?
Um, right now I'm just sort of in a figure it out phase. I do have concept for the third, follow-up book, and just waiting to see sort of what pans out. You know, it's my ultimate goal with that is, I'd like to sort of, the first book, School for Invisible Boys, followed Hector. and he does appear in the second book a little bit with Sam. But my ultimate goal is for the third book to bring all of the characters from the first two books together. And I even have a title if it ever gets finished, and it's called "The Underground for the Lost and Found." And that's the concept I have is. Um, I can't say much more because it might spoil the second book a little bit, but I'm hopeful. With publishing, you just never know, sort of what's going to happen. But it's there in my head. The concept is there and pretty fully formed. So if I get to go ahead from my publisher, it shouldn't take too long. I'm a fast writer. But yeah, I'm sort of in a transitional phase where I'm just kind of trying to figure out what's next after writing uh, so many books and I say such a short period of time because it was 15 years, but I mean, it's still a short period of time for that many books. I'm just kind of stepping back and reassessing, where I'm at and what's going on because the world has changed so much in 15 years. You know, I think I need a break, but no, I still really enjoy writing middle grade, and I have a bunch of ideas that I would really like to do. One of my goals is I would really like to write, and I just pitched it as like The Martian for middle grade. I really want to write like not like literally like The Martian for middle grade, but I really want to write like a middle grade book that is super science focused for all the like really hardcore science nerds like I was, uh, to just sort of because that's what I loved about The Martian was like reading sort of the things that he did and going, could you really do that? And then like going and researching it, being like, oh, you can really do that, and I want to write a middle grade book like that. So we'll see where it goes. I'm excited. Like the future is kind of cool.
The future is kind of cool. And I love how you kind of like walking the walk and asking yourself those philosophical questions that pop up books to see where you might go next.
Usually at night when I'm trying to go to sleep.
Of course. Of course. Why I have
But
a
no,
notebook right by my bed.
yes. That's such a smart thing to do. People don't realize that. Like when, a story idea pops up, like instead of just thinking about it, I get up, I go, I write it down, and then I go back to bed. Otherwise, it will haunt me all night long.
Yeah. Or you forget about it and you'll lose like the next, big thing that you swore you
Yes.
would forget.
Although, and it is something I kind of go by because I suffer from too many ideas. And so one of my friends, an author, Delilah Dawson, who is just an amazing, amazing author, um, she said, any idea that's good enough, it'll come back to you. Like you'll remember it. Like stop trying to chase every idea because if it's good enough, it will come back. And I think like,
That,
A Home for Unusual Monsters and The School for Invisible Boys, like both of those were ideas that
right?
I had, been sitting on for a decade and just sort of like every once in a while they would pop back up and I would go, okay, how can I do this? And when it was ready, when the School for Invisible Boys was ready, like it was ready and it came out. And then when I started Home for Unusual Monsters, that old story idea just came rushing back in and I was like, oh, okay, here's where this, belongs. And so I try not to get too hung up on story ideas.
I'm borrowing that. I'm borrowing that phrase.
It's good. I mean it really works and I think, because I guess story ideas are kind of a dime a dozen, right? Like I famously like my first book was The Death Day Letter, and it was about a story about, everyone gets a letter 24 hours before they die. And then later on, I saw there was another book that came out a few years later, and it was called something Denton's Death Date. And it was about everyone knows the day they're going to die. And I was like, huh. And it was funny because the main character's name was Denton Little, Denton Little's death date. And I thought it was so unusual because I used the name Denton in We Are the Ants because it's my brother's middle name, and it's such an unusual middle name. I had never heard it before, and so I was like, did he like read the book? Did he know my age? And he didn't. It was just like a weird coincidence. And then not long after that, Adam Silvera came out with his oh my gosh, it's the one they both die at the end,
Oh, yeah.
where everyone gets a text message the day they're
Yes.
going to die, and he hadn't read either of our books. No one read my book, but he hadn't read either of our books. And it was just this really happy coincidence,
Yeah.
and they're three radically different books in like how they approach it. And so I just think, book ideas are really a dime a dozen. It's all in your experiences and your execution and what you bring to it that really makes books special. Um, so, yeah, when authors, and I was one of those authors, but when they talk about, oh, someone's going to steal my idea, I'm like, let them. It's not going to be the same book.
Right.
Like,
Right. Because it's not,
not even remotely.
yeah,
Yeah.
not you. I feel like we could just talk for hours about books, storylines, and all of the big themes that come from them. But to wrap the episode up, and I want to make
I know. Oh, I'm sorry.
oh, I love it. I love it. But I want to make sure listeners know where to find you online so they can find your current book, A Home for Unusual Monsters, but then also just go through all of your backlist books as well. So where's the best place to get a hold of you and find you?
Right now it's SeanDavidHutchinson.com. I'm not doing too much with social media at the moment, but my website is always there. It's paid up for the next 5 years, so it'll never go away. And I do keep it fairly current with everything that's coming out. So, and then I try to do school visits around Seattle when I'm able to. I do work during the day, but yeah, I'm kind of quiet right now, just keeping my head down writing, so not really a lot of touring or anything. But yeah, mostly it's just online, and I think I still might have some social media links up, but don't use those because I don't think that they work anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, social media, as we talked about before, it's a funny place. And so I think websites are the best place to find what you want and need to know. And so I will just
Yes.
link to that in the show,
Yes.
along with
Awesome.
the books and the titles of yours that we
Thank you.
talked about today. This was
Thank you.
a lot of fun. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it really was. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved it. And listeners, I hope that you love the conversation. I know you will love the book, A Home for Unusual Monsters, and I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all of the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. You'll also find KidLit Love on Substack. That's where you'll find posts for each episode, monthly KidLit roundups, and an invitation to join my summer book club and go deeper into the world of children's literature. And if you loved this podcast and want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing to build a life you love. One more thing. If you loved what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.